Hey, it's Robert Beard, the host of the Commercial Landscaper podcast. These podcasts challenge you to grow as a leader, to stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone, and to 10x your company. I really encourage you to enjoy the show, share it with teammates, fellow business owners, and subscribe. That helps us grow our community. Hi, this is Robert Beard with the Commercial Landscaper podcast. Really excited today to be joined by Kory Mitchell. Kory, welcome to the show today.
Robert, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this one for a while.
Yeah, I know we've had a bunch of conversations recently, but I was glad to get you on the podcast. And I'd love the audience just to know a little bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah, so I've been a specialty contractor pretty much my entire life. I grew up in a small blue-collar business that did asbestos abatement as a teenager. And then I ended up ultimately buying that business from my dad 20 years ago now. And then that business grew to be a national company. We turned it into a kind of a turnkey environmental services business that had everything from contaminated soil and water and demolition and consulting and things like that. And ultimately got it up to 37 locations and about 1,500 people. And then we sold the business in 2021. And I was CEO until 2 years ago, 2024. I left the business and I started a business called Iconic Founders Group. And that business focuses on supporting blue collar founder businesses through either scaling to get to become a more valuable business. Ultimately, it's about taking businesses from maybe a smaller business to a transaction, or we help them go straight to transaction. So now it's sort of like an investment bank, but specifically supporting the blue collar industry. And it's from someone that's been through it before. So I've got that perspective now after many years of mergers and acquisitions, and served on a bunch of boards for the last several years that are of national companies, including a business called Canopy Service Partners, where we've done 20 acquisitions in the green industry over the last couple of years. So spent a ton of time in buying and selling businesses and also being involved on both sides. So it's been an amazing education from being a mom and pop asbestos abatement company, but it's been a fun ride along the way.
No, this sounds like a great journey. I definitely heard of Canopy, and obviously, as you know, it's a pretty hot space in the M&A space, being the green industry. So, probably bringing a lot of knowledge to the business.
Yeah, it is. It's been a really attractive market. Of course, on both the commercial landscaping side as well as the tree industry, both residential and commercial. So it's been really fun to kind of see how that's evolved over the last couple of years. And now, you go to these conferences. Went to the Aspire conference and NALP stuff this past year, and you can't move more than about 5 feet before you see an investment banker or a private equity guy kind of walking through the room.
Yeah, it's so true. So true. I was at the Elevate conference in Phoenix. I mean, it was a packed room, and it was so much, either private equity was there or just people interested in that active space. But I know that I think was probably one of the the ideas you had about starting your new venture into podcasting. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to get the word out there about, really what the transaction space is like for the blue collar industry. And I know me, like when I look back at where I was 10 years ago, I mean, I couldn't spell M&A, right? I had no idea what it was like to go through a transaction. I wouldn't know who to call. And so I'm trying to really bring education to the trades and the entire blue collar industry. So what I'm doing is I'm interviewing founders who have sold a company, and that could be everything from a landscaping business to a demolition business. I've just launched it 6 weeks ago, and actually 2 out of my first 3 podcasts were in the green industry. 2 landscapers and 1 who sold a landscaping business and a tree business. And it's been a lot of fun because I get to, ask them what that whole process is like. And it's not just about the transaction process. It's also about the human side of what it's like to go through a deal. I know, like for me personally, and I think you've got personal experience of this yourself. Like the feeling of going through an exit is a really, really strange one. And it comes with a ton of mixed emotions. And you might make a lot of money, but you have guilt and you feel like you're letting your team down and you're worried about what your legacy is going to look like. And there's so many different stories. I've got my version of it, but I love asking others to tell their story. So I'd love it if people would tune in. The show's called The Turn, and you can go to my website at iconicfounders.com and you can click on the podcast there, but it's available on all the channels, YouTube and all the other podcast channels, both in video and in audio. So I'd love to have some of your listeners tune in.
Yep, no, absolutely. Yeah, I've listened to a couple of episodes and yeah, really good, worthwhile listen. So nice job with that, Kory.
Thank you.
Talking about that, it was interesting because I was at a training session I was facilitating earlier this week, and that company had just been bought by a private equity company, and the founder was there, the son was there, and we got into a really interesting discussion around my experience with it, and there were some good and bad stories with it, but there was still some apprehension because there was some lofty goals had been thrown at them. There was still some uncertainty with some of the staff members. A lot of them were worried about going corporate in their mind. But I shared with them some of the ideas around the scaling principles, and it was pretty interesting, just eye opening. It reminded me of my journey, just like you, just the highs and lows, the the turmoil that's caused. So
yeah, go ahead. Finish your thought. Sorry. Yeah. So first of all, what I would say is private equity is sort of taken on a dirty word out there. I mean, a dirty connotation. And it's true that the majority of buyers today are, some version of private equity, or could be a family office, which is often kind of the same playbook as private equity. And even if it's a strategic buyer, it's often backed by private equity. So the reality is, everyone hates private equity until they see the size of the check. And so it's one of these things, if you're going to sell, you sort of have to reconcile with the idea that there's a possibility you would sell to PE. What I think is really important is that you really vet the private equity sponsor that you're considering. And this is where I think working with someone is really important to make sure you don't just take the first offer that comes in, because there is a world of difference between private equity firms. There's thousands of them now. People don't realize that. There's literally thousands of PE funds out there representing trillions of dollars of equity and debt. And so you want to find out who else they bought. You want to figure out how they think about how they think about it post-transaction, what they think about people and culture. And so if you don't do your homework and you just take the first one that comes along because they throw out a big number, it could be a mistake. Look, it could work out great, but it could be a mistake. And what I would say is, if you're a good business, you're going to get a good buyer. So you want to take your time to make sure it's right. And I mean, that's the work I do now. I mean, we work to make sure that we find the right fit so that people don't end up regretting it. And I'm not saying it's ever going to go perfect, because it's not. PE only buys a business for one reason. They want a return on their investment, period, full stop. And that can come in the form of a variety of things. Some have a longer term horizon where they might want to hold it for a while, but ultimately they're going to want to exit it at some point and they're going to want to get a return. Others have this 2 or 3 year flip model, and that kind of takes a different shape and form. So understanding who you're getting in bed with, I think, is really important, so that you know what kind of ride you're in for. And I also, as one last thing I'll say, is I recommend calling multiple people that they've acquired, either in that roll up itself, but also in other industries, because all of these people have bought a variety of industries. Find out how the people felt post transaction, so you can see, who you're partnering with.
No, that's great advice. And it's really tough to evaluate sort of the people in front of you, because I think as I've discovered, a lot of those either investment bankers or the people that you're put in touch with are born salespeople. They're going to sell you this great playbook, and everything's going to be great. Nothing's really negative going to come out of it. But and even I suppose, that's one of the things I recommend is, hey, go back to look to some of the past sellers. But again, often you're given a select few people. So how do you?
That's right.
Are you reaching out to them through research, through either some of the AI stuff or trade magazines, just to find out the whole list of people they've acquired over the last few years, and then connect with them through LinkedIn? Or what do you recommend as being that good due diligence?
Yeah, look, first off, I always ask buyers for a list of everyone they've acquired, now, and if they're being super selective about that may be an indication of something. But yeah, we can also, those are lists that are easy to pull. You can find out every roll up they've done over the last 10, 20 years. And you can easily ping someone on LinkedIn they've acquired. It's pretty easy now, particularly with AI, to find out that information. And people are always happy to talk about their experiences because they've been there and they know what it feels like to have that unknown. So absolutely. I think that would be a way to do it, is, reach out on LinkedIn and just say, hey, I'm thinking about selling to these guys. How'd they treat you? How was your experience? How did your people deal with it? What did they view on the culture side of people? Because at the end of the day, most founders that you talk to, their number one concern is their people, much more so than the price that they're getting. It's their people. So I think the way they do diligence, if they only do spreadsheets and legal, and they're not asking you about your people or visiting your sites or visiting your office, there's a good indication that's how they think about people culture.
Let's take a minute to thank our sponsors. Urcher is a life brand born from grit, founded by Zach Strausser. The mission is clear: to raise $1 million for the trades by supporting vocational training across North America. Urcher makes tough, smart gear built for landscaping and snow professionals who work hard outside every day in all conditions. Their apparel puts safety first, helps crews look sharp, and honors the pride in their craft. Every purchase has purpose, fueling training programs and building a resilient workforce. Urcher isn't just workwear, it's a culture of respect, resilience, and results. When you contact Urcher, mention Wilson 360 and Zach and his team will take well care of you. What's been your experience on, I think in many cases I come across, the owner or the founders are really locked into trying to make this happen. They're scrambling to get through due diligence. So in some ways, they I suppose, take their eye off the business a little bit. So they don't necessarily see some of that slippage, whether it be the culture, maybe the revenue driver, some of that slips off. And then maybe they're 6 months into due diligence and suddenly they're in decline.
Yep. This is like more the rule than the exception, right? Because diligence sucks. There is no other way to put it. I've never heard anyone that didn't think diligence sucked. So what I recommend every time is to bring in a resource to help you quarterback the diligence process, because, we're not talking big money here. You can bring in someone and it's not a full-time job. It's 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, maybe. Somebody you can hire for $5 or $10,000 a month for a couple of months. But number one, it's an add back. So it'll be an add back to EBITDA. But two, it will save you in terms of your ability to keep your sanity, but also keep your business running on track. Because as soon as the business starts declining, which happens all the time in these deals, immediately we start extending the diligence period. Oh, we might need to watch this for another 1 or 2 months and see why is your business declining? This is strange. Is this normal? They start questioning every little thing as soon as you have a little decline in the business. And of course, we all know as owners of businesses, that happens in our industry. But it gives them a reason to, one, question the valuation. it gives you a reason to delay. And now all of a sudden your diligence went from 60 days to 9 months. And then maybe you never get it closed. So having that person that can support you through that process, it's not that expensive. It's an add back, which means it'll be added back to EBITDA when they multiply the multiplier for the valuation, and it'll save you, honestly, in more ways than one.
Potentially, you could even start that process before you even get into any type of LOI, due diligence, where you're just beginning to almost build that data room, just getting things cleaned up. And that could happen, a year, 2 years in advance? I mean, there's probably some benefits there rather than sort of just cram through that last 3 or 4 months of due diligence.
Yeah. So here's how I think. If you know that you're going to do a transaction, if the way your mind is working is like, in 2 or 3 years from now, I'm going to do a deal and I'm going to exit. And I always try to start from the end state. Like, what do I want the business to look like at end state? That is, one, going to be the most attractive business to actually transact. So that's where you start thinking about customer concentration, revenue mix, maintenance as a percentage of your revenue, all the things in your industry. There's a lot of things that are really important for valuation, such as like maintenance concentration versus construction, things like that. But then the flip side is also your systems and your data. And you want to build a system that is able to spit out reports that make it really easy to look at the quality of your business. And you want to be able to slice and dice the data really easily, because due diligence requests come flying and you've got to be able to respond pretty quickly. And if you can't, again, they start questioning, well, why can't you produce these reports? You must not really understand your business. And so if you really start building those systems out, we're not talking rocket science here. We're just talking about some simple things you can do to improve the quality of your data. And by the way, it's going to make you a better company. It's going to make you a better manager. All of those things are going to help you anyway in your day-to-day job. So I put together kind of a checklist of things that are going to move value drivers to get a bigger number at exit, and start chipping away at those over time. And then to your point, some of you may want to look at what a standard diligence request list is, and you can just start populating those folders. They want to know about long-term contracts and they want to see every single one of them. So that might be something that you create a current repository of contracts. That might not be how you currently are housing your information, or it could be on 10 different computers in your office on different outlooks, So little things like that can make your life so much easier if you prepare for it, if you got that kind of time and know that's where you're headed.
I had an interesting conversation actually earlier today where companies planning an exit, we've already uncovered there are some challenges in that middle senior managers level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that, is that discussion around, well, do you keep them in place and not create some disruption, keep that momentum going? But, there could be an option of some type of an earn-out or, contingency based on the performance of the company afterwards. And maybe that's not the right person. What have you seen work to the best in those types of scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky one, and it really kind of depends on what the owner of the business is looking for post transaction. If the founders is looking to, stick around and continue to work in the business for 3, 5, 10 years, that's kind of a different thing. If the owner is looking for an exit, clean exit, as quick as possible, then leadership transition is so critical, because you cannot. They will any buyer is going to throw so many things at you, whether it be more money, another earnout, more equity. So they're going to put as many things in front of you as possible to get you to stay. And it becomes really hard to walk away if there's no obvious choice in the succession plan. So if you got enough time and you truly want to exit quickly or relatively quickly after you sell, I recommend having, as world-class of an operator as you can running your business as kind of your key number two, or in an ideal world, your key number one, where you can start to really transition the business before a sale. If you're looking to get out of the business, you want to have, and you want to be able to say with a straight face that you truly are a passive, owner of the company, and you've got the best management team in the business, and it fully operates without me, and I just come in and check in on a couple afternoons a week, whatever it is. But if you can't do that, you will end up having a really hard time leaving the company. So I think it really depends on what the goals of the owner are. I think, it becomes challenging if that person you're talking about is not quite at the level, but they might be good enough. You have to kind of make some judgment calls there, depending on how much time you have, because we all know replacing those people that have been with you for a long time, it's like recruiting unicorns. So there's real risk in destabilizing the business, and you got some real risk reward calculus you've got to do. And so I wouldn't want to give a one size fits all, guidance on that, but it's a really important question, and I think something that every owner should be asking themselves as they're thinking about their long-term plans.
Yeah. As you're speaking to, you've been there yourself, and you're having some guests on your podcast, and they've had an exit, and that time afterwards is not often talked about, where they've been the go-to person, and suddenly that life support cord has been sort of pulled out, and suddenly people are bypassing them, decisions being made elsewhere, and it's a pretty challenging time that very few people talk about, and that could last 6 months, a year, 18 months, and I've even talked about developing some peer groups around some past owners that can just talk through those types of experience, as well as how do they invest their money into other things afterwards. But what's been your experience on that scenario, or what people have you talked to?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, everyone wants to sell, but of course, many people who do sell end up unhappy. And they end up unhappy for lots of reasons. It might not be because they got a bad deal. It might be because their entire identity was tied in their company, and now they just don't know what their purpose is. So I like your idea of like a support group for exited founders, that can all kind of cry on each other's shoulders. I might join. So let me know when you get it formed.
Okay, no worries.
No, yeah, but seriously, like I've seen this in so many different forms, because oftentimes it goes incredibly well, and you've got. I can tell you, like, the business that I sold, we bought all these businesses along the way. The majority of those founders that we bought along the way are still there today. I'd say 75% of them. And we're talking 6, 7, 8 years later. And they're the critical, they in our case, we left all of these brands intact all over the country, and they're still running their little, fiefdom. And they still kind of control their own destiny, at least in their own office. They just now have some reporting centrally. And a lot of those people, they didn't know any different, and they made plenty of money, but they just wanted to keep working in the business and the office that they always knew. So there's plenty of those stories. But the flip side is there's a lot of other stories where, of course, when you're a small mom and pop in particular, and all of a sudden these big boy, fancy New York City guys come in with their spreadsheets. And, they've never worked in a construction business before. And they've read in their Harvard MBA program what you should be doing to build. And so you see this resentment all the time from these founders that have had unbelievably successful careers, right? They've built a very successful business. They might be the richest guy in their hometown. And all of a sudden, some 25-year-old is going to tell them what to do and get out their spreadsheet and tell them that they're not growing fast enough. So, I mean, there's it can be really, really hard, and it can be a really tough transition. So again, this is where knowing who you're getting into bed with, and hopefully, you get kind of some version of the truth as you're sorting that out, but it can be really hard. And then there's all kinds of other challenges. I mean, cash flow. People that had a business that are used to getting, they sort of didn't live on a budget because they had this lifestyle business that spun off quite a bit of money. If you sold a business, it probably made over $1 million a year, and sometimes many, many millions a year. And now all of a sudden you got this one pot of money, and it scares the hell out of people because they don't see anything coming in. They start panicking, thinking, well, this pot, even though it might be pretty big in some cases, it's got to last me forever. And you see them freak out about their finances, and they start tightening everything down in the budget. And so it's really kind of a strange thing to think about, that you could actually get a life-changing sum of money and actually be the most terrified about your spending that you've ever been in your life. People, they're not going to cry for you because you just made a lot of money. But the reality is it's a hard thing to go through. And so there's a lot of different versions of those kinds of things that owners experience. And you're right, it's not talked about. And it should be, because a huge amount of the transaction is actually not financial. It's emotional, it's psychological,
100%.
It's identity, because you and I both know, like, you're running this business, it becomes your life. You spend more time there than you do at home or with your wife. And if you lose that, you can lose a big part of your soul. So it's tough to definitely, as you're thinking about it out there and you're thinking about doing a deal, talk to others that have been through it and prepare yourself for it, so it's not a huge shock to your system.
Yep. Yeah, I think at least when you have your business and there's a mistake made, whether you bid something wrong, whether you operationally screwed up or something, then you make a loss on that job, but you're still in business. You're still able to make that back up.
Yep.
That year, the following year, when you have that pot of money and you make a bad choice, either through some investment or something, then there's a not a great deal of opportunity to make that up, especially if you're a little bit older.
Yep.
So, and that's where they sort of that emotional piece comes in, and that the stress comes in. And in theory, you think you're going to be happy because you have that nice pile of money, but it's somewhat slightly more stressful.
And most people are going to say to you, Robert, cry me a river. You sold your business, and I want to have that chance to sell mine and be sad about it, right?
Yeah.
People don't experience it until they experience it, but I definitely recommend talking to people that have been through it. And there's usually people out there in your peer group or your community that you can lean on. So I highly recommend it.
Kory, how we're pretty close to wrapping up here. What are maybe some of the other things that people should be thinking about if they're thinking about some type of an exit? Maybe it's like a year or two out, that just they should start really thinking about and preparing, just so they're best prepared for that life after exit. Or maybe it's just growing their business and then enjoying the cash flow, and they've got somebody else operating it.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure I understand your question. Do you want to know how to best prepare the business for the exit, or themselves to be out of the business?
Oh, good. Yeah, but good point. I would say, why don't we go with the themselves?
Yeah, I think if you want to prepare yourself to be out of the business, you have to start actually doing some things that are not in the business. I'll tell you my own personal experience here. I never had any hobbies at all. I worked. Everything for me was about work. I spent the last 20 plus years flying around the country, buying businesses, growing businesses, putting out fires everywhere. And I didn't make any time for myself, for whatever it might be, hunting, sports, any of it. If I was lucky, I'd, take a vacation a year, but I was on the phone the whole time, stressed out. And If I was lucky, I'd keep going to the gym, but I just didn't have a lot else. And so you suddenly, when I quit my job, you want to talk about a weird thing, like quitting my job after having essentially the same job for the last couple of decades, there's not a lot to fill it up. So I think from my standpoint, what I wish I had done is, really started to make more time for myself while I actually owned and ran the company. You've only got one life and one health and one family and these things. And so, don't put it off until you're actually unemployed. Because then it gets really hard. Now it's strange. So, you're, a little older at this point, your friends are still working. They're not available because they're at their jobs, and all of a sudden, like, how do I fill my day? What, how do you find meaning in your day and all those kinds of things? So, not a great answer to the question, but I think trying to find some meaning outside of your business becomes really important, whatever that might be. And then additionally, maybe starting to see what that feels like by bringing in a world-class manager that can help you start to run your business so that you can actually start to hand things off and know what that feels like. Because 90% of the time, these smaller regional businesses, the customers are all owned by the founder. They don't trust anyone else to take care of the customer. And so you have to start that process of handing off the trust to someone else. Because if you don't start doing that, one, you can't get out of the business. You just, there's no one else to do it. And two, you'll never know what that feels like to actually let go a little bit. And that will make you a more attractive exit as well, because you'll have a ready-made manager that's ready to take the business without you, over the next few years if you decide to leave.
Yeah, not great answers. And I think really love the finding that world-class operator. I talk to a lot of people who are an exit, start thinking about, building that bucket list. Where do you want to travel? What are the events they want to see? Is it the World Cup? Is it the rugby, the Hong Kong Sevens? Is it, any of those types of things? Or maybe, they want to develop a hobby. Is it golf? Is it pickleball? Whatever that type of thing is. So just getting them to start having those discussions with their partner, I think is super key. Kory, how do people get hold of you if they want to explore, what you do, want to learn more, maybe even be a guest on your podcast?
Yeah. So, you can always just go to iconicfounders.com. You can reach me there. My email is kory.mitchell@iconicfounders.com. So feel free to shoot me an email there. And then there's a link on our website for the Turn podcast where people can let us know if there's someone that would be a good guest on the podcast. And then also, look, I'd love it if people would follow it, like it, subscribe, because you can make a great podcast, but if nobody watches it or listens to it, it's not worth much. And please forward it to your friends that might find it useful. And last thing I'd say is if people are looking to talk about, doing a transaction in the blue collar industry, I'm here as a support. Our whole team is here as a support, whether it's to help you scale it to get ready to sell, or if you want to take it to market now. We're working in the green industry all the time.
Awesome. Kory, thanks for your time today. Always good to see you.
It's a real pleasure.
With the podcast. So I'm
Thank
sure
you.
we'll see you at some of the upcoming events.
Yep. I'll be there. I just put in an application to speak at one of the NALP, I think Elevate, this fall. Okay. So maybe I'll be there talking about mergers and acquisitions.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Kory. Okay.
Yeah.
Have a good week.
My pleasure.
Okay. Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
You do the same.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Commercial Landscaper podcast. I hope you're walking away with some great nuggets that you can immediately apply to your business, whether you're in leadership, operations, or you just want to show up every day with that Ironman mindset. Remember, growth doesn't happen by accident. It happens with intentional moves, bold conversations, and surround yourself with the right people. If you found value today, subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with others. And again, don't forget to check out Wilson-360 organically.com. We have digital courses from account management, operational excellence, leadership development, or some of the other coaching packages we offer. Anyway, a huge shout out to our sponsors. Thank you very much. And I'll leave with this. Have a pure, dead, brilliant day.